Kia ora, welcome to Under the Checkered Flag, MotoGP edition. I'm your host Kate, and we're just going to jump right in. So, Phillip Island delivered the racing. It never fails to do so. From Moto3 all the way up to MotoGP, it was some spectacular racing, some wonderful battles, and even though Phillip Island yet again was disrupted by wind and rain, and we do need to wonder about maybe shifting it in the calendar, it was just a wonderful weekend. I do feel really sorry for the fans that only would have been able to attend the Sunday, because what happened was the Sunday Grand Prix race got swapped in for the Saturday sprint, so the Saturday sprint got moved to the Sunday. The sprint was later cancelled due to the incoming weather, but we did get to see those three races. So I'm going to start by talking about Moto3, but more specifically, I'm going to talk about Joel Kelso. He's an Australian. He got his first Grand Prix podium this weekend, so absolutely massive props to him. And he also secured a contract for a ride next year at Bo Motorsports. So overall, I think this is going to be one wonderful weekend that he will find it very hard to forget for a very long time. Now, on to this race. This race was an absolute banger, as Moto3 always is. So we saw a really good battle, basically. So it was raining in the race. We saw the World Championship leader, Jamie Massier, drop down the order. He did manage to come across the line in P8, if I remember correctly. And it does mean his championship's still alive. It does mean he's still in the lead, but he is only still in the lead because of the other two people on the podium. So in P3, we know that we had Joel Kelso. In P2, continuing his string of P2 performances, was Ayumu Sasaki. Now, he looked like he was going to win this race, and you really thought he was going to, and he was really pushing hard. But the closer and closer it came to the end of the race, and the more that track dried up, you just saw Dennis Onshu closing that gap, and you knew that he was going to take him in the last gap, and he definitely did, meaning that Dennis Onshu is now a 3-time Moto3 winner. So big props to him as well. Sasaki moves within just a few points of the championship, so it shows that this championship is still wide open, as Moto3 always seems to be. Overall, I think it was my favourite race of the weekend. It wasn't my favourite last lap of the weekend, but I will come to that later. And overall, now we're getting near the end of the season, I am just going to run through the championship picture. So in P1, we have Jamie Massier. In P2, we have Ayumu Sasaki. And in P3, we have Danny Holgado. And realistically, I do believe that any one of these three could win the championship. Before I move on to Moto2, I do just want to say a massive shout out to Adrian Fernandez. So this was one of his first races, and he was leading for a really good chunk of it. And I'll admit, I didn't expect much from him. I honestly wouldn't have even put him in the top 10, but he's leading for so much of the race. And then a mistake where you have to say that the punishment did not fit the crime, and he crashes out of the lead. He does, although, regain in P5 and cross the line in P5. A really strong performance from him, and I guess it just goes to show that there is a reason he's in that seat. On to Moto2. Now this was a race. Quite often I don't think that with Moto2. I think it can be a bit of a, for lack of a better word, snooze fest. They can quite often be a bit repetitive, and you know what's going to happen and all of that sort of thing. This one wasn't like that. I'll admittedly say I think it should have been red flagged earlier, and ultimately this lap was red flagged, and because the 2/3 race hadn't been completed, half points were awarded. the drama of the Moto2 race started on the sighting lap. And it starts when Pedro Acosta crashes. So I had him down, as I'm sure many people did, for a win this weekend. Although I'll admit, in the Discord fantasy, I'm still voting for Aaron Canet because I still am living on pure copium that he will get a win this season. Fingers crossed, he can do it. Come on, Canet. I believe in you. But we all really do have Acosta down for winning this one. And then he crashes out and he can't get his bike started again, which is an absolute disaster for him. It takes him a while, but he does manage to get the bike back to the garage. But that means he starts the warm-up lap from pit lane. Sorry, he crashed on the sighting lap, starts the warm-up lap from pit lane, and then starts the race from the back of the grid. Now, we know that this isn't too harsh for Pedro. We know he's won from pit lane before. He's just that much of an absolute talent. And so he's always still going to be in the mix, and you know you're going to be watching him cut his way through the field. And he absolutely did cut his way through the field. He ends up finishing in P9, and part of that is because of him, and part of that is because of the sheer number of people that crashed out of this race. So personally, I think the red flag should have come a lap or two, possibly even 3 laps before it did, because the amount of crashes we saw are as follows, and I actually had to write it down because I wasn't going to remember them all. So we saw Garcia crash out of the lead, which I for one am quite gutted about. I know a few in the Discord server, Izzy especially, would have been really gutted because he was performing so strongly. So he crashed out of the lead. Dixon went down, Vietti went down, Cassidy went down, Lowe's, Salak, Boltus, Binder, and I do apologise if I butcher this, Vad Gunberg also crashed. I know I'm going to get stick for how I pronounce that. I'm so sorry. I'm really working really hard to get my pronunciation right. So that means we had a very sparse field that were finishing. So it gets red flagged and it gets half points awarded. And so the official podium was in P3, Furman Aldeguer. In P2, getting his 14th P2 performance is Aaron Canet. And in P1 is Tony Arbolino. Now, I think this is probably the happiest we're going to see Aaron Canet be with a P2 for a while, because it was clear on everyone's faces that no one wanted to go back out there and ride again, because, yeah, it just wasn't the good conditions. It was just rainy and windy and horrible. One other person who crashed out was Alonso Lopez. He did rejoin the race, so I didn't include him in my fall as before, but he was another one. So in total, that's just a huge amount of crashes, and you can clearly see why they called it there and why the sprint got cancelled. So I think the sprint getting cancelled, the biggest loser there is Jorge Martin. I think that he would have performed strongly in the sprint and collected quite a few points. How his competitors, especially Pecco Bagnaia, would have performed, I'm not too sure. But on these notes, it's clearly time to talk about MotoGP. So for the second weekend in a row, World Championship leader Pecco Bagnaia found himself in Q1. So that was not the way he wanted to start the weekend, and I have to admit, I enjoy it a little bit more when one of the big players is down in Q1, because it adds that little bit more excitement. It adds that, ooh, are they going to get out? Are they going to start well down the grid? He didn't. He went straight through to Q2, and he even manages to put it on the front row for the main race. So the front row for the main race in P3 was Pecco Bagnaia, in P2 was Brad Binder, and in P1 was Jorge Martin. And so it's really good, in my opinion, to see just the spice at the front. And so we're coming into this weekend and you're like, what's going to happen? It's Phillip Island. It's notoriously great racing. And this race was the exact same. So Jorge Martin took a gamble in the main race and he went for the soft tyre. Now, in my opinion, his reasoning behind this was get a really good start, get out in front, get a really, really big gap to that group, and then just manage that tyre. And I think he did it well, but clearly he didn't do it well enough. And I also think that he got a little bit overexcited because he was setting hot laps, like really fast laps, that if he had just took a few tenths of a second less on each of them, he wouldn't have cooked those tyres and he wouldn't have cooked them so quickly. Maybe Jack Miller had given him some tips, I'm not too sure. But it was just an odd call initially, but I could also understand the reasoning. Unfortunately, it doesn't pay off for him. So he does end up leading this race for the entirety of it, right up until I believe it's 8 corners to go. So he gets nudged wide by his Pragmatic Ducati teammate Johan Zarco, who then goes through, and it's basically once Zarco is through on Martin, the rest of them go through, and he just plummets down the order a little bit on that last lap. And it's an absolute disaster for him, basically. It's the only way to describe it. So Martin did still manage to finish in P5, which, considering how much he cooked those tyres and how rapidly his time started falling, I think he's probably quite... you can't say happy with that result, because he's definitely not happy with that result. But you can say that he damage limited as much as he could with that result. Ahead of him was Brad Binder. Now, I actually had Brad tipped for the win for this one. I honestly thought he'd perform a little bit stronger, but given the sheer amount of passion and performance of those who are in front of him, I can kind of see how he ended up in P4. And to be honest, I'm kind of glad that he didn't take P3, because P3 was Fabio Di Gianantonio, and wow, I'm so happy for this kid. He got a podium. It's his very first Grand Prix podium, and let's not forget that this guy doesn't have a ride for next year. He doesn't have a team. He's being replaced at Gresini Ducati by Marc Marquez, and the fact that he's just gone and got himself a podium puts him in really good position for bargaining. So I'm going to come back to that after we cover who was in P2. And now this is where the World Championship has really spiced up. Pecco Bagnaia was in P2, and with Jorge Martin down in P5, it really puts this World Championship into a little bit more spice, because now at the end of this weekend, Pecco Bagnaia is in the World Championship lead with 366 points to Jorge Martin's 339 points, meaning that Pecco Bagnaia is now 27 points ahead. Considering we came into last weekend with 3 points between them, now we are 27 points between them. And with everything that's happened, this is exactly the kind of drama I'm looking for. And it has me so excited coming into Sepang, because there are still so many points and there's still 4 races, so it could go either way. And I'll admit, I've probably put my Kate's curse on Jorge Martin by absolutely rooting for him and saying that he's going to win this World Championship. I still think that. I know that this race showed something totally different though. It showed Jorge Martin going with his gut, which is the kind of rider he is, and he's the kind of rider I like purely for that. The ones that are a little bit more feisty and get their elbows out. Whereas this one clearly showed Pecco Bagnaia being cool, calm and collected, and I think this is where his VR46 Academy training is really starting to show its head, because he saw that main group running away and it would have been so easy for him to panic and cook his tyres like some of them did, but he kept his cool, he kept it nice, calm and collected, and he saved it all for the last few laps when he knew he had to be in that leading group and when he knew he could make the most advantage of it. And that is exactly what he did. He waited, he saw his opportunity. As soon as Johan Zarco went through on Jorge Martin, he went through on Jorge Martin. And I personally think that he didn't hesitate there, partly because he wanted that P2, but partly because he knew that Fabio Di Giannantonio and Brad Binder were right behind him. And not only did Pecco Bagnaia want to finish in front of Jorge Martin, he wanted as many people as possible to finish in front of Jorge Martin, because he knew that way that he could collect more and more points gap to Jorge Martin. And that is exactly what he did. So not only did he get through, Fabio Di Giannantonio got through, and Brad Binder, so that's more and more points. But Pecco only finished in P2. And I've mentioned his name a couple of times already, but in P1, finally, on his 120th Grand Prix race, Johan Zarco took that top step of the podium and we got to see the backflip. How happy am I? I can't even put it into words. I am honestly super chuffed for him. Finally, really, that's all I can say. It was like, oh my gosh, he's done it. I'm going to put a link in the description below, whether you're watching YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. It's just going to be a link to the French commentary and the last lap. It's been released free on YouTube, so not getting myself in any copyright drama, but the absolute passion and excitement in those commentators' voice, you gotta go and watch it. Seriously, it's wonderful. And yeah, that's all there is to it. Johan Zarco won the race, and at first when he got right behind Martin, I'm like, play the teammate game. And then all of a sudden I'm like, wait, no, this is Johan Zarco. No way, get you in, Zarco, get you in. And he did. It was just absolutely wonderful. And yeah, we got to see a couple of backflips, and it is a bit of a shame that they wouldn't have been able to truly celebrate, because like I said earlier in the pod, this Grand Prix race was held on a Saturday, and so they all thought that they may have the sprint the next day, so none of them would have been able to get on the beers or on the Prosecco, and neither Johan Zarco, who finished in P1, or Fabio Di Giannantonio, who finished in P3, would have been able to truly celebrate. I'm sure they celebrated on the Sunday as soon as the sprint got cancelled. They would have been hitting that bar. Well, not as much as they'd like to, because next week we are at Sepang. So I'm just going to have a short break, and then I'm going to go into my final talking point before I preview Sepang. And my final talking point is, where is Fabio Di Giannantonio going to find himself next year? Is it going to be on the MotoGP grid? Is it going to be in Superbikes? Straight after this. I think I just needed a breather there. I got myself all caught up in the excitement and reliving Johan Zarco's very recent win. I do want to talk about Fabio Di Giannantonio. I think that this newly found form is due to a variety of factors. I do think some of it is having the pressure taken off his shoulders, so to speak, of the fact that he doesn't have to, all this stress to perform, to try and keep his seat, because Marc Marquez is now been confirmed to be taking that seat alongside Alex Marquez. So I think that's part of it. I do also think that some of it is, we've heard in recent interviews that previously Fabio had been trying to use those same settings that the majority of the other Ducati riders use, because obviously it's working so well for so many of the others. He's very recently swapped up his settings, and I think that's clearly made a big difference. I think that that's helped him have that step forward, and he's finally gotten that space where he's willing to try out different things and find his own riding style with the Ducati, so to speak, rather than relying on the fact that the Ducati itself is just so good. Some of it comes down to his team manager, whose name I've been trying to remember for the last minute or two, and it's just evading me. The team manager, or I suppose you could call it the rider manager, he worked with Joan Mir at Suzuki, so he's managed a world champion, and he's new to the team this year because obviously Suzuki left. And I think this is definitely part of what's also pushing him forward. So I think it is going to be quite a big shame that now he's found his feet in a way, that he could be looking at losing his seat completely. I can't really see a space for him to slot in to World Superbikes at the moment. All the seats that would, I suppose, be open to him at Moto2 have now closed their doors. The only real possibility for him movement-wise is whatever is going on with Honda. So Marc Marquez, obviously having left Honda to take Fabio Di Giannantonio's seat, opens up a Repsol Honda seat. We know now that Johan Zarco will be seeing out his contract at LCR. Zarco himself has confirmed this, and part of the reason Zarco announced this was because he said that Repsol Honda had only offered him a 1-year deal, and that's exactly why he left Ducati. Other names in the mix with this Repsol Honda move or vacant seat, whatever we choose to call it, are Maverick Vinales, Alicia Spargo, and Miguel Oliveira. Now, these are 3 Aprilia riders. They're all on contracts for this year and next year. The only one I could see possibly this playing into the hands of is Miguel Oliveira. I don't think Alicia Spargo is going to even consider this offer. He's in a very happy place with Aprilia, and I think over time he could look at a team management role after test riding for a few years and doing his own thing. We know he's got a young family and things like that, but we also know that Honda has a lot of money and they could throw lots of things. We've seen from Alicia's vlogs that he likes the finer side of life. He likes expensive cars and things like that. But I do think that he'll value Aprilia and that family vibe more than going to Honda. The only one I could see swayed is Miguel Oliveira. But I do think that Miguel is smart enough to play this very, very well and have it all play into his hands, provided he plays his cards right. And I do want him to play his cards right, mainly because I do kind of want him to go over to Honda so that Fabio Di Giannantonio can take his seat at R&F Aprilia, because I think that would be a really great spot for Fabio. I think having him at R&F, having him remain in a smaller and more family-friendly team would really help him shine. I think we'd see more strong performances from him, and I think we'd see a good number of years with him staying in MotoGP. I think Miguel moving to Repsol Honda would be a much better option for everyone rather than Fabio Di Giannantonio moving to Repsol Honda, where I think he would very much be a stopgap. He would go there for a year and then would probably never speak of his name again. So there is still that option, and realistically I think that's the option that's more likely to play out, him going to Repsol Honda rather than Miguel going to Repsol Honda. What I really want to happen is Miguel go there, signs a 1 year plus a 2 year, so does 1 year at Repsol Honda and then probably 2 years at a satellite team. Ideally it'd be 3 years at Repsol Honda, but I just can't see that happening. So it'll be really interesting to see play out in these next few weeks, but we're nearing the end of the season and that Honda seat is remaining unfulfilled. It's going to be very, very curious indeed. So now let's preview Sepang. So Sepang, I suppose I've been a bit, what's the wording? I just, yeah. Okay, I don't know how to say that word. That's my feeling. I just feel, about Sepang. I felt this way for a number of years, probably 8 years specifically. And yeah, I can just never really get as excited about it as other races. Hopefully this wears off soon because the track is really quite something to look at. It's got some really nice long straights. It's got a few, not sharp corners, but it's definitely got corners that can cause some drama and some entertainment. And the long straights are just really fun to look at. I do think that this is going to be a KTM and Ducati track. Maybe that's just because it's been a KTM and Ducati year. I'm not too sure. But I do think we're going to really see those riders on those bikes that we're really expecting to do well here. So I'm talking the likes of Pecco Bagnaia, Jorge Martin, Brad Binder, Jack Miller. The truly quick guys, I think, are going to be our big winners here. In particular in Moto3 and MotoGP, that we're going to see some spicy last lap drama on corners 12, 13 and 14. I think we're going to get some really good action in those corners. I think that Moto3, well, we all know is going to be spicy no matter what. I think that we're going to see some championship drama, I suppose, because I think that Dennis Onshu is going to get in there up among Sasaki and Jamie Masia and truly ruffle some feathers, because he seems to be that kind of character. I think he's the villain that MotoGP needs right now, but I think that Pedro Acosta clearly is going to beat him there, and I think Pedro Acosta is going to be that villain. I think he's the one that's going to come in, like Marc Marquez did, and ruffle those feathers like they need ruffling. And so that's why I think it's really quite cool that next year we're going to see Marc Marquez on the Ducati, but we're also going to see Pedro Acosta come in on a KTM and give absolutely zero stuff what everyone is thinking. He's just going to get in there, and it could be Valencia at the end of next year, and it's down to, say, Martin, Bezzecchi, and Marquez, and Pedro's just going to get all up in there and ruin someone's race, and then it's going to be this big drama. It's the drama like that that is missing in MotoGP at the moment, I feel. We're getting a little bit of this year between Martin and Bagnaia. You can definitely see that relationship's cooled quite significantly. And naturally, Marc Marquez has got in there and backed Martin, and you can tell that's got behind Pecco Bagnaia's skin and has ruffled his feathers. I think we're going to see a lot more of that next year. And I think that is exactly what kind of drama Dennis Onshu is going to bring to Sepang this year. I don't think Dennis Onshu is going to end up on the podium, though. I do know he won this year, but I do know he won this race that's just been at Phillip Island, but I think because we have those two long straights at Sepang, it's really going to hinder him because of his size. It's just one of those things. I think he'll do a lot better in Moto2. In P3, I put Danny Holgado. I think he's going to try and keep his head cool. He's going to try and stay in this championship fight, but I think he's going to let Onshu ruffle his feathers. I also think Onshu's going to ruffle Jamie Masia's feathers, and so I've put Masia in P2. I think all of this is going to play in the hands of Ayumu Sasaki, who I've put in P1. Maybe it's just because I've got this thing about people who constantly end in P2 and wanting them to break that cycle, just like Johan Zarco did this week, just like I really, really want Aaron Canet to do, just for my psyche. Just please, Canet. That being said, my Moto2 predictions. I don't even have Canet on the podium. Purely, I'm basing this off his performance last year. Now, I didn't actually watch last year's Moto2 race, so I'm going in a little bit blind here. I did think about going and watching it before this, before recording my podcast, making my predictions, but I'm going to do it afterwards. So my predictions, as always, are subject to change, like all my opinions do constantly. But in P3, I have put Jake Dixon. In P2, I'm putting Pedro Acosta. I think he's going to worry about the championship more than anything now, coming with 4 rounds to go. I'm pretty sure he could win it this weekend, thinking about it. But I think he's going to end up in P2. I think in P1, we're going to see Tony Arbolino. And I think that that's just going to wrap itself up in a nice little bow. While I'd love to see this one go down to the line and we come into Valencia not knowing who the World Championship leader who the World Championship belongs to, I think at this point it's safe to say, barring any unfortunate events, which obviously none of us want to see at all, but barring anything outwardly insane, we're not going to see anyone else but Pedro Acosta take this World Championship. So that brings me to my MotoGP predictions. Starting with the sprint. So I think for some reason in the back of my head, I can't shake this feeling that Jack Miller's gonna have that P3 spot on the podium. So naturally, given the success rate of all my predictions so far this year, we're never going to talk about these predictions again. Because I make these predictions, and then they're completely wrong, and then I just pretend they never happen, until that one weekend where I get all 3 classes spot on, and I'll claim to be a genius, because I'm that good at predicting things. I'll probably sell my prediction services. I'm kidding, of course. But basically, I've got Miller in P3. I think he's not going to cook his tyres this week. Whether that he gets cooking, that remains to be seen. In P2, I'm putting Pecco Bagnaia. I think now he's got those 27 points in the bag, he's going to play this championship game. He's lost the championship lead for a whopping whole 24 hours, but I think it's going to have shaken him enough to make sure that he keeps that cool head from here on. And so naturally that means in P1 I've put Jorge Martin. He's got nothing to lose now. I think it's very much going to be win it or bin it for Martin here until the end of the season, unless Pecco makes a mistake, unless Martin pulls off something brilliant and Pecco pulls off an average performance. I think that Martin's just going to be throwing absolutely everything he has at this, because then he'll start thinking, well, it's now Pecco Bagnaia's championship to lose. For a moment there, it looked like Martin could win this championship, but now it is very much Pecco Bagnaia's chance to lose this championship. Could be a simple mistake, but that's the way I'm looking at it now. For the main race, I've gone for Pecco Bagnaia in P3 for those exact reasons I just outlined. I think he's going to be playing it safe. I think if there's an opportunity to take that P2, he's going to take it. But I just think that Martin's going to want this weekend so much more, partly to prove to himself, partly to prove to everyone else. Yes, he's probably not going to make that gamble with a soft tyre, and actually, I think that if we had had that sprint on the Saturday and the Grand Prix on the Sunday, Martin would not have gone for a soft tyre on a Sunday. So that's why I think this weekend was a massive loss for him, and I don't think it was all his fault. Obviously, it was no one else's fault, because it was just the weather, but I just think it was a big, big loss for him. So for the main race, I've put Pecco in P3. In P2, I'm putting Marco Bezzecchi. I think he's finally going to have a bit more oomph in him. I do think Marco Bezzecchi's going to play a bit more of a character. Is that what we call it? I don't know. A bit more of a part in this play in Malaysia, Qatar and Valencia. But I think he's still going to play a big part with a P2 performance on Sunday. And then, of course, I've got to back him. Now I've said that I think he's going to win the championship, right? I put Jorge Martin in P1. I want to see this championship stay right down to that line. I want to come in with something like 3 points to the last race, like we did last weekend. I want that drama. Thankfully, it does look like we're still getting it. It does feel a bit like, I can't remember what year it was. It would have been 2005 or 2006, possibly 7, where we came down to the end of the season. Like I said, I've been back and I've watched every single race since 2000, because I only really started watching in 2017. I dabbled a bit from 2012 onwards, but 2017 haven't missed a session. And yeah, it was around 2006 you got this pendulum where it was like one person's race one week, one person's the next. And yeah, I kind of want to see that right now. I want to see it here. I want to see it in Thailand. I want to see it in Malaysia. I just want the spice, really. But as always, I'm going to leave it here. This is going to be the last weekend of our first triple header, and then we have a weekend off, and then we have another triple header. I have to admit, I am actually exhausted already. That weekend off, I think I'm just going to sleep, get up, record my podcast, and go back to sleep. But I will still be here next week, same time, 5 p.m. New Zealand time, every Monday. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Like and subscribe if you feel like it. Catch us next time.